Just remember what the MPAA says. Horrific, deplorable violence is okay, as long as people don't say any naughty words. That is what this war is all about. What?
Yo, what's good, fam? Instrumentality's on that we good again. And we flipping out like the end of my brim. Tryna get that good, so I throw in the fin. Getting it in, living it win, reminiscing. We can give a fuck about tomorrow's begin. So we at Water Tower till they think that we residents. Posted on walls like Facebook messages.
Cartoon Theater. Saturdays at 7, only on Cartoon Network.
In today's world, movies based on TV shows are a dying art. Sure, every now and again, you'll see some fantastic ones out there like 2023's Craig Before the Creek, but for the most part, the practice of adapting one of these plots to the small or big screen is more or less something that doesn't happen as much anymore, whether it be through series never lasting longer than a few seasons or networks and corporations not wanting to take that chance. But a lot of people forget that there was this, dare I say, era where both theaters and TV channels everywhere were getting slammed full of TV show adaptations. You name it: Recess, Kim Possible, Lilo and Stitch, The Wild Thornberries, SpongeBob, Rugrats, Kids Next Door, Dexter, Powerpuff, even something as obscure as Teacher's Pet got one of these. And that came out in theaters. Sure, it makes sense when your show is doing well in ratings and chugging out both media popularity and toy sales. But if your series is just doing so-so, unless you market it well, more often than not, it ends up being a risk financially. Ranging in quality, these films remain a good reminder of sometimes what you should and shouldn't do when adapting a TV show to film. But in the sea of these adaptations, one stood out above the rest, and is what I consider the cream of the crop when compared to what it's stacked up against. And as you know from reading the title, you know what I'm talking about. South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. I know it might sound crazy, but this is a film I genuinely believe changed the game for adaptations in a lot of ways. For its creators, for its network, and even for the people that watched it. Coming out at the very beginning of its popularity to massive success, if it wasn't for the specific events that took place at the right time, the right motivations for making this the best it can be, and the overall work that was put into a feature like this, I'd go as far as to say that the South Park that a lot of people know and love now wouldn't be around today. Matt Stone and Trey Parker have proven time and time again how good their writing can be with other projects, yes, but this was the first time that I believe their genius truly showed, and with the way they were able to get other stuff off the ground. And a little confession here, but before starting this channel, I used to watch this movie religiously. It was one of the first actual mature pieces of media that roped me in with its writing and storytelling. Even when I launched this channel way back when, one of my goals was to always cover this movie at some point. So here we are. With a movie that's home to so much history, controversy, and especially story, let's go over that film today. Let's go over the legacy of South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. Before we talk about anything related to Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, we kind of need to talk about the movie's origin. The first 3 seasons of the show were proving itself to be the stepping stones that made the movie what it is today after all. Before the specials, before elections, before the games, these South Park seasons really showed the evolution of the series as a whole. Overall, these seasons represent an era far from what the show is now. It was a time of little to no satire for current events, where the show was given a chance to find its footing in terms of storytelling and script style. Before relying on the drama of the week, most of the show's focus was aimed at telling the most nonsensical, random, and funny jokes they could muster, going from scene to scene with just the goal of entertaining the people that watched it, no matter who it was. That's not saying that they didn't do their fair share of messing with celebrities though. From Jennifer Aniston to Korn to a whole bunch of musical celebrity guest stars, every episode was like a Russian roulette of who they wanted to bring on and make fun of next. They weren't interested in giving these people a pedestal. They wanted to offend and shit on whoever they wanted, whenever they wanted to, a tradition that's carried on in the show to this day. Make no mistake, the first 3 seasons aren't perfect. Like I said, it was trying to find its footing, so a lot of the episodes are slow, and I mean really slow. An episode's 22 minutes, so they really have to stretch some of these jokes out more than a regular 11-minute episode would. In my opinion, it really did some of its best work when the stories got split into focusing on multiple characters in the main cast. Pair that with the fact that at the very beginning of the show's life, it kind of becomes more and more obvious that the show's biggest selling point was its writing, and not its animation. I know South Park isn't the prettiest show on TV, but it's wild to me how low budget the whole thing looks. With about 3 people or so doing the voices. Gives it a nice indie garage feel, funny enough. Shows like South Park, Space Ghost, and others came out exactly when they needed to at a time where blocks like Adult Swim were starting to get their footing and networks wanted to take more of a chance on adult programming back when there was little to none of it on TV, at least on this level. So in an era where this type of stuff was in high demand, many networks flocked to make their own. USA, MTV, Comedy Central. This was definitely an era that no matter where you went, you saw at least one of these after Simpsons premiered. After these three were done, the crew were put under a new task. Their initial contract signed them up for both 3 seasons and a feature film. No matter how successful the show would be, they had to go through with that deal. With several scripts and multiple delays later, South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut would hit the scene in 1999.
Ah, screw it. It probably isn't all that good anyway. Cartman, what are you talking about? You love Terrence and Phillip. Yeah, but the animation's all crappy.
South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut is a 1999 movie that focuses on a group of boys dealing with the chain of events that follow them after watching the hot new Terrence and Phillip movie, Asses of Fire. The boys are tasked with the rescue of Terrence and Phillip before they're executed in order to prevent the rise of the devil and Saddam Hussein and save the world. With an explanation of the premise like that, right off the bat, the plot that got written for the movie seems to fall in line with how I described the original 3 seasons. If you were to describe the movie to someone who hasn't seen it, then an episode of South Park stretched out would be a pretty good explanation right then and there. But the genius of a movie like this comes from just that. It uses the facade of just being a stretched out version of an episode to do something that at the same time I think was pretty unexpected, to commentate on the state of how media was handled and even is handled now, especially the way people, particularly parents, look at what needs to and doesn't need to be censored. A lot of people are aware of this, but back in a time where a ton of media that tried to push the envelope in terms of what can be on TV were around, many parental groups were of course against those very shows. South Park's a pretty big example as is, but what really started this was The Simpsons. Many people, both parents and in the professional field, didn't know how to tackle stuff like Bartmania. The Simpsons as a show was huge at a time where series like it focused on the more safe, sanitized family formula. In the 90s, you couldn't even wear a number of Bart t-shirts around the school without them being banned.
And The Simpsons, even Bart, are not necessarily a bad influence on kids, according to some psychologists.
This is something that they can grab onto and identify with. If Bart's having problems and making it and doing okay, maybe I can make it and do alright too.
You gotta remember the time frame this came out in. There weren't a lot of other TV shows and series to pick from that weren't either supercharged kids' toy commercials or boring by-the-books educational shows that were heavily monitored so parents would form the nearest angry mob. It was a perfect time for these up-and-coming series to premiere and act as this massive, brash counterculture at the time. It came out when people wanted to watch stuff that wasn't the norm. Of course, nowadays The Simpsons is in more of a state where people don't really care for it. It's like a star athlete that's past its prime. People will only talk about it to reminisce on its golden years. But I think the same point stands for this and South Park. And that's what made the movie more special in my opinion. The most raunchy, in-your-face comedy, at the time at least, trying to commentate on something serious, and it works. And all this is represented in the movie pretty well. It's aimed to be a criticism of themselves as well as its reception. The boys going to see Asses of Fire not once but twice representing the audience that watched South Park despite the pushback from parents. Terrence and Phillip being treated like criminals I'm sure was a good reflection of how these creators felt about South Park at the time. Even the MAC, or Mothers Against Canada, stands as a pretty good representation of the parental groups that were against the show since day one. This angle of censorship doesn't end there either. During the whole 2 years of production on this film, Matt Stone and Trey Parker were fighting heavily with the MPAA, with them having to follow all sorts of crazy rules and regulations to keep it in its R rating, and the movie eventually was submitted to the MPAA a total of 7 times before finally being able to release in theaters. It's also why the very way it's structured also works so well. At the time, parents wanted the show to be more child-friendly, with it being very well known for its crude humor, vulgar language, but for the longest time their criticisms went nowhere and the show continued airing.
That was when we were on the cover of Rolling Stone. We were on the cover of Cartoon Network when we had a huge article in Time. We were the thing for that month, right? And that kind of press buys you numbers. There was a lot of people watching the show who probably had no business seeing it. It still gets great ratings.
Here though, it pretty much tricks people into watching a version of the series that these parents wanted so much, opening with a big, Disney-esque musical number before throwing us into the main premise itself. I'll go more into the movie's musical aspects later, but bottom line, the intro itself also managed to pull off a type of criticism in its own unique way, and that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. When it comes to our main cast of characters, I really do like what they do with their motivations here. The film might not be an origin story, but it does have a fair bit of charm to it, with the movie focusing on them learning the very curse words they use throughout the show. I'll admit, my first time watching it years ago, I wasn't expecting that type of turn after the intro, but it was a very welcomed one for sure. All 4 of the boys play roles that are pretty true to character for them when considering the time it came out. Stan has his eyes constantly focused on Wendy Testaburger, on how he can win her over. The movie sparks a fire in his motivations by also involving another boy in the picture named Gregory, pretty much introduced in the movie to be a counterpart to the boy. He's still involved with the conflicts, but his motivation is still split down the middle, if that makes sense. Albeit those motivations do kind of lead to the worst series of songs in the film's soundtrack. Yes, I know they're meant to be corny, yes, I know they're pretty short, but that doesn't mean they're not annoying.
Can't you guys be more political like
There's
Gregory?
the girl that I like. Now it appears that she likes another guy. It must be because he's political.
Kyle's arc during the movie is a little bit more on the understandable side. He's caught in the middle of everything, being one of the 4 kind of responsible for the events that play out. With his mom leading the charge against Terrence and Philip with her group Mothers Against Canada, the stakes of the film get set as it's not just his and his friend's safety at risk, but the lives of 2 of the boys' biggest icons. In order to save the day, he has to work up the courage to stop her before anything rash could happen. I feel both his and Sheila's roles in the movies perfectly reflect a lot of those old school parental groups and such that were trying to get South Park off the air back in the day. The ones that were more focused on being in the right rather than protecting and policing the media their children watch. And with how things have gone in the last few years, it's an issue that has done nothing but age like fine wine more than 20 years later.
Don't worry, Ike. We're gonna put an end to this. And then I'll make Mom come home and we'll all be a family again.
While the first 2 of the boys' motivations are pretty easy to describe, Eric's a little bit more difficult too, because for all this movie does well with, what it does with a few of its characters does kind of make the flaws with its writing either more obvious or shows its age. Don't get me wrong, Eric does a lot in this movie, from his musical number called Mom's a Bitch, to him using the V-chip implanted in him in order to take out Saddam Hussein near the movie's end. But overall, it does come off as Cartman being Cartman for most of the runtime. He's still fun, but there's not much to say about him here. And then there's Kenny. Honestly, considering the point in time this came out in the show's life, where Kenny's deaths were most common in episodes, giving a plot for him where the character actively goes to hell after the way he died not only acted as a good way of expanding on the character, but a smart way of introducing one of the main threats of the story too. For someone that isn't with his main group for most of the movie's runtime, I actually found myself enjoying a lot of Kenny's moments throughout the movie. While not as consistent as Kyle or Stan, he does offer what I consider some of the better moments in this movie, with him being sent to hell with a metal musical number, to him attempting to tell the boys of what's to come, to even sacrificing at the end of the movie, eventually leading him to entering heaven by the end. At the end of the day, it just goes to show how Matt, Trey, and the rest of the team were able to keep multiple points of view no matter which medium, mostly entertaining. Whether it's a regular 20-minute episode of a TV show, a massive hour-and-a-half long movie, or even a 40-minute special way later on, time and time again, they've proven that the writing of South Park is what made it what it is today, and the movie celebrates it. What goes along well with its writing is the humor too. It's pretty well known that at least when compared to a lot of its contemporaries, the biggest contribution to the show's success has and continues to be its type of comedy. Being honest, while the animation isn't the prettiest thing to look at, the writers take a shotgun approach to the type of jokes they tell, often leading to some, if not all of them, hitting, and this translates pretty well to their feature film. A lot of their choices for the type of jokes they can tell can maybe go over the head of any teen watching it, as it did for me watching it first at 16, but as a 22-year-old, it just makes me laugh all the more. Characterizations like Satan comes to mind for one. A figure that was told to be the most unforgiving, despicable creatures around was portrayed as one of the most blatant Disney princess types around, even down to having his own I Want song, something that we'll get into way later. Not only that, but there's also a ton of jokes that come in one after the other, some quick and some more than a minute long. It's a testament to the approach that South Park has always had when it came to comedy that resonated with a ton of people. To laugh is to make any situation at least a little bit more bearable, no matter what it is. Make no mistake though, with how solid this movie is, it does tend to slow down in pace around the halfway point. It's something that bothered me then as it does now. Scenes take forever to finish, especially with Satan's side of things. The only saving graces for this part of the movie are definitely the jokes and songs, but as we'll find out later, a few of them do feel like they're just crammed in rather than just be there intentionally. With all this in mind, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut has a place, to me at least, as one of the best movies out there to ever do it. It's not perfect, but it took a show that had a pretty simplistic concept at the time and pushed it to its limit, making an enjoyable experience that goes beyond the regular TV movie. Many others have tried to difficult levels of success, but few have done it to the level of Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. The stakes, writing, and production all click here in ways a lot of other series just can't. Which brings the question, how does it compare? Of course, comparisons aren't a good way to determine a movie's value. That's obvious. But in the same way I talked about The Fairly Odd Parents last month, we need to ask ourselves, had the situations been different, would the reception towards this have been received the same way had it not been out in the time that it did? For this, I got two examples to bring to light on the right and wrong way to adapt a series to film. Both have their flaws, but they assist in helping us to understand what Bigger, Longer, and Uncut does right and what pitfalls it could have fallen into during its production. First up, now, The Simpsons have been around for a long while, longer than many other series in fact, so with that long of a history, it kind of doesn't surprise anyone that they've had a movie as well. In all honesty, I believe that The Simpsons movie is a serviceable one when compared to the rest of The Simpsons' modern catalog of episodes. But more than a decade since its release, I think I'm of the minority when I say that while the movie does do a good job of entertaining, it does struggle from the fact that it did release so long after the so-called golden age of the franchise, being set to be around the 3rd to 9th seasons of the show. Around the time this movie was released, however, the show was in its 18th, so safe to say that it was a far cry from any of the show's signature wittiness it had back in the old days. There's a lot here to point out. A lack of the supporting cast, the Simpsons not all having an equal amount of motivations in comparison to the main plot. But the biggest issue here for me is the characterization that they give these people. There's a sense of ultra pessimism that this movie has, especially with Homer. Believe me when I say that jerk-ass Homer is here a lot of this movie. It doesn't make it bad per se, but it makes it less enjoyable for me. I still enjoy it, but one can't help but think when watching that had a movie to one of the most successful, groundbreaking, and influential shows in not just animation but TV history ever would have benefited from a movie that came out at a time where a lot of its best writers were still on board. There's just a lot of that heart and good intention that can be found in a lot of earlier Simpsons that you can't really find here. And even then, as time has gone on, the movie served as more of a checklist item more than anything else. Just for people to say that they've seen it. There's not much to give the movie props for it nowadays. The show's animation has been on par with it for so long that it's not even noticeable, and the writing of the series, 20 plus seasons later, is still as inconsistent as ever. At the end of the day, the movie's still good, don't get me wrong, but as someone who adored it before and still kind of has a soft spot for it now, the flaws are just kind of too big to ignore here. Rugrats is an example of a franchise that was also considered a phenomenon. When released alongside its other Nicktoon brothers, Doug and Ren and Stimpy, it shattered expectations with just its success alone. Talk show appearances, toys, commercial spots, 2 spin-offs, and a CG reboot of the property. So safe to say the impact of this series has been felt for a long time. That being said though, with the impact of the show comes the effect of its feature films too. The first one to be exact. It can be considered the one to start off the big TV movie craze. Being the first non-Disney animated film to gross over $100 million. There were ones before, don't get me wrong, but around the time the first movie came out, corporations started flooding them out to get the same effect. That being said though, the Rugrats movie is what I consider one of these TV to film adaptations done right. Is it perfect? Hell no. But it's proved that adapting a TV series to film while taxing is a worthwhile effort when the property is adaptable. There's a sense of something grander here. The babies are on an adventure unlike any other. The danger feels real. The multiple perspectives don't feel like a time waster but a way to enhance the movie through understanding people's motivations. Not to mention the massive amounts of marketing that this had. The soundtrack, the ads, the promos, it somehow tied the movie together with a nice bow. At the end of the day, these two stand as great examples of what can and can't go wrong while adapting a series to the silver screen. They can range in problems but still stand out in terms of memorability and the entertainment aspect of them as movies. It's something to appreciate out of Bigger, Longer, and Uncut. It proved that it was an investment made by the team and creators to be worthwhile, not just as a checklist item, not just as an excuse to make money, but an effort that you can see all the work put into. And that to me at least makes it all the more special. Yeah, I would bring up one more example, but it's best saved for other projects. Last but not least, one of the most influential and arguably the thing that made this movie known to so many people is the soundtrack. I've gone on record saying that the soundtrack to a movie is pivotal to its success. It's an aspect of films that I don't usually see people talk about when movies are at the forefront of the discussion, and something that I wish got a lot more love in the world of movie reviews. Not including reprises or bonus tracks in the official album for the movie, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut's soundtrack has a total of 10 songs that are included in its runtime, all with different types of melodies, vibes, arrangements, genres. The whole whole thing, and it would be a disservice not to cover them all right here, right now. Keep in mind that not every song is gonna be included on here, like Hell Isn't Good or any number of Stan's reprisals throughout the movie. I'll try to go in detail the best I can with all of them, but with all these being as long as 3 minutes, there's not really much I can say, so not all of them will be getting an essay, but I will try the best I can. So, here we go. The song the movie starts off with, Quiet Little Mountain Town, is probably the one and only way that a movie like this could start with. It acts as one of those sort of Disney-esque, welcome to the world of the story type songs that a lot of kids' films at the time were sporting. I'd even go as far as to say that the movie even uses this the same way the rest of it is written, as one of the biggest middle fingers to people that wanted the show to be more kid-friendly. But besides the song's parody nature, it stands out as a pretty solid replica of those original Disney tunes at the time, bringing in a whole orchestra for it. All the boys have different switches in the orchestration when they get introduced too. Kenny has more of a banjo in it, and Carl has more horns, helping set the tone and establishing just who these characters are. It's kind of crazy how good this intro starts off the film, with pretty good integrations of a chorus, having dialogue from all of the different players in the movie, which I think was a really smart touch, and overall does a really good job of introducing us to a movie with a lot more songs to offer. Compared to the first song of Bigger, Longer, and Uncut, Uncle Fucker's one and only goal is to, in lack of a better word, troll the audience watching it, serving as a satirical look of the movie's themes overall, but by using South Park's one and only strongest weapon, humor. Though vulgar and over the top, the song highlights the show's long-lasting tradition of using humor to critique real-world issues like censorship and moral panic, especially at this time in the show's history. This also brought light, to me at least, one of the best selling points of the movie, period. In the midst of the creators' fight with the MPAA, their R rating pushed the movie so far that it actually holds a record for the most swears in one single film, with 399 words in the entire runtime. Yep, one more swear word and it would have gotten hit with an X rating, so they kept it as just the amount necessary to avoid it. What a story. Out of all the songs in this soundtrack, this one stands as one of the most South Park-like tunes out there. The mix of humor, shock value, and sharp satire makes Uncle Fucker one of the most iconic musical moments in the movie, and perfectly encapsulates the sort of creative genius that the team behind this had cooking for it. It's Easy MK is a pretty solid song in the soundtrack, all things considered, harnessing the musical prowess of the movie to turn into a song in the same vein as Sesame Street or Schoolhouse of Rock, focusing on Mr. Mackey trying to re-educate the kids of South Park on the foul language they picked up when watching Asses of Fire. If being a parody of those preschool or DARE programs was its goal, then it more than knocked it out of the park with clever lyrics, snappy choreography, and a melody that's actually kind of an earworm at times. And now we've reached one of the most well-known and probably the song that's the most relevant to the plot and themes of the movie. If you ever wanted a song that represented all the frustrations Trey and Matt had with South Park and the parental groups that wanted it gone back then look no further than Blame Canada. At this point in the film, the stage is set. The parents of South Park are all aware of Terrence and Phillip and the effect their movie had on their kids, and so they attempt to go to war, figuratively and literally. The song's littered with some of the most clever writing, which pretty much can boil down to, it's not my fault. Parents passing the blame to each other for their children's behavior. Instead of doing something about it themselves and actually parenting, they'd rather aim their anger at the biggest heads in the room, forming an all too memorable mob mentality. Give me catchy lyrics, good orchestration, and have it be a great addition to the story so far, and I have no doubt calling this the best song in the movie so far. But in terms of memorability, it's not alone. What can be considered to be alongside Blame Canada is another one of South Park's staple. Where Blame Canada was big in terms of its strength in writing, this one's big in just how silly it can get. Cartman's big show-stopping moment, if you will. The number grows more and more grand with every passing lyric. Different versions in different languages around the world, albeit doing it in its own South Park way. Ending it off with one hell of a jazz solo. There's a reason why this one is sort of a highlight when it comes to South Park's music as a whole. In one of the only few songs done by the boys in South Park, this track actually handles itself with a lot more positivity than the rest, actually being a positive stint talking about Olympic athlete Brian Boitano, where the boys build him up as some kind of god. As a song, it's crazy catchy like the rest of the soundtrack, but as a joke, it does a great job as a callback to one of the earliest of South Park gags, if I'm not wrong, referencing the creator's original short film The Spirit of Christmas where he makes an appearance. Hell, even Brian Boitano himself initially thought that the guys behind the movie were gonna tear him a new one, since that's how they usually handled referencing celebrities in the show, but after seeing this, it surprised him with how the song came out, something to commend the South Park crew with once again. I I feel the songs on this movie, ironically enough, do showcase a lot of good range when it comes to vocal performances as a whole. I know, Rich coming from South Park, but they really do fit here, and Up There is probably one of the better examples of that range. Up There is a heartfelt ballad sung by Satan, who dreams of leaving hell and experiencing the beauty of the world above. In the song, Satan laments his lonely existence in hell, expressing his desire to live among the clouds and enjoy a peaceful life on earth. Who would have thought that the devil, who's portrayed alongside Saddam Hussein as a sort of big bad of the film, would be given a musical number that, like I've said before, was akin to a Disney Princess I Want song. And once again, the instrumentation, the vocals, the visuals, all kind of click perfectly when it comes to this. The themes of being alone, feeling like no one in the place you're in is like you, or really doesn't understand you, or relate to your struggles, really does hit the same vibe as something like Mulan's Reflection or The Little Mermaid's Part of Your World. Again, it's a parody, but it's a parody that shows the quality of its work. Guys, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. This is my favorite song on this soundtrack. Yes, the track that starts itself off with a Les Mis inspired opening, more specifically, Can You Hear the People Sing, is my favorite. But this is the one and only song in this movie, in its entirety, that does two things that I think make it. Number one, it brings most of the cast together, no matter which side you're watching. Mothers Against Canada, The Army, Satan, Terrence and Phillip, or The Boys, all their musical numbers make a comeback in this mix of different styles, voices, and tones, coming together to make La Resistance what it is. And two, it's the only song that represents the stakes in this movie as a whole. After all that build-up, establishing each and every side of the movie is pretty much the halfway point of the movie before everything hits the fan. The best way I could describe the song is like setting up a chessboard, where your rooks, knights, kings, and pawns are all preparing for a battle. No one knows how it'll go down, and you can go in with only what you know. And in the same way La Resistance does just that, there's only one thing that ruins it: the song that comes after it. Even as a teen watching this, I Can Change was always the waste of time. After such a powerful number that could have set everything in motion, this brings that motion to a grinding, screeching halt. I've never found anyone that enjoyed this one. It's that bad. The movie slows down for a bit halfway during the setup, and this is partly the reason why. Like, where a lot of musical numbers are snappy, paced really well, and so on, this just doesn't have any of the qualities of them. To me at least, there's just nothing redeeming about this number. Nothing at all. Last but not least is probably one of the most flamboyant and exciting tracks the movie has, in my opinion. Pun not intended. For a character that didn't show up throughout a lot of the early half of the show, giving a character like Big Gay Al such a big song with so much going on just feels right. I don't really know how to explain it. The song is something that perfectly captures the type of person that can't really feel down no matter what happens. I'm Super's a showstopper musical number with lyrics that pertain to those type of people. Even Al himself goes on to explain why he can't feel bad for the war that's going on. There's no easier way to describe it. This song will do nothing but make you feel, well, super.
Everything is super when you're gay. When you're gay.
The legacy of this movie can't be understated. A lot has happened since the time it was released. Blame Canada was reprised by Robin Williams at the Oscars in 2000.
Now, blame Canada! Blame Canada! It seems that everything's gone wrong since Canada came along.
For the series' 25th anniversary concert, Matt and Trey sung a lot of the numbers from Bigger, Longer, and Uncut to massive praise.
Don't you do it! Don't say it! I'm warning you! Okay.
The show itself has gone on to have more than 20 seasons, and as of recent, this year marks the 25th anniversary of the movie itself. Which, mind you, when I started writing this like more than a month ago, this wasn't the intention. But bottom line, there's a reason why people keep talking about this movie to this day. There's a reason why a ton of people still remember the songs, the plot, the jokes to this day. It's because whatever the team behind this did, whatever was intended on their end, it worked. And it was only possible with the circumstances that made it. Sure, nowadays what you think of the show is up to you, but this was the first time one of their ideas made an impact, and that's something you can never take away.